A door panel that flew off mid-air on a 737 MAX 9 in January, apparently caused by missing bolts. Two crashes of the 737 MAX 8 in 2018 and 19 in which 346 people lost their lives. Tragedies in which faulty software played a role. Not to mention the pandemic, which triggered a massive dip in demand for air travel. The last 2 years have been a catalogue of disasters for Boeing, prompting accusations that the plane maker has a quality control problem. To talk about what has gone wrong and whether Boeing can emerge from this crisis, I'm joined now by Jeff Wise, aviation journalist and host of the Deep Dive MH370 podcast. Jeff, it seems extraordinary that complacency could prevail at Boeing in the years after those two crashes. What do you think has been going on behind the scenes?
Well, clearly, and I'm not the only person to point this out, there's clearly a leadership problem at Boeing. There's clearly a systemic problem. The company clearly is not minding its P's and Q's. There are just over and over again quality problems that in some cases have led to hundreds of people dying. And I think this sort of, one would have, I think as your question implies, one would hope that after these massive tragedies, that would inspire some kind of change of course, which I think is, look, if this door blowing out had happened, in the context of just an excellent safety record, I don't think it would have raised the eyebrows that it did.
Yeah, and this is it. There's been a lot of talk about Boeing's attempts to cut costs over the past few years, especially when it comes to its suppliers. To what extent do you think that has contributed to where we are today?
I think that there are many layers to this cake, and this kind of fashion in business circles for efficiency, to minimize costs, to return value to shareholders. Boeing was spending billions buying back its stock when it could have invested billions in building a new, safer aircraft. What manifests as a individual person not properly installing bolts in a door assembly is downstream of a entire cultural shift that has taken place in American business, the financialization of what had formerly been an industrial company, and so forth. So there's, in aircraft accident investigation, they like to talk about the idea of Swiss cheese. You have slices of cheese, each with a hole in it. And these holes have to all line up in order for an accident to take place. And so in this case, yes, there's all of these different factors that take place, including the ones you mentioned.
You mentioned that individual undertaking safety checks, and I want to talk more about that because over the past few years, Boeing has lost a lot of talent, and some people are saying that brain drain has contributed to gaps in quality control. Why do you think the company is losing its best people?
There's an entire genre of documentary now. On Netflix, you've got documentaries, you've got books written about this. It's just a very well documented fact that Boeing has a culture that prioritizes profit over safety. And that is just ultimately you are killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Boeing completely dominated the manufacturing of commercial aircraft for decades. Then Airbus started up and has just been sort of methodically and slowly. They made some bad gambles, like the A380 turned out not to have worked, but they have basically been keeping their eye on the ball in a way that Boeing hasn't.
Let's have a look at those two companies now, because of course Boeing has had to contend with a lot of other challenges recently, including that major dip in demand for air travel during the pandemic. If we look at performance since 2018, we can see that the company has really struggled to recover from the disruption caused by COVID. It caused a far more prolonged dip than the two crashes did. And that's especially interesting when we compare Boeing's performance to that of its European rival Airbus. You mentioned it yourself. It has fared much better since then. Why has the post-pandemic recovery been so difficult for Boeing, and why was it easier for Airbus?
Two things happened at the same time for Boeing. It was like, the dinosaurs got hit by an asteroid and also volcanoes or something. I mean, we don't really know what killed the dinosaurs, but it was like a kind of double whammy kind of effect that becomes an extinction level event. You've got, yes, this COVID-inspired drop in air travel, which causes, a fall-on effect of lack of demand for planes for a while, very temporarily. At the same time, you've got these terrible crashes that put a stain on Boeing. It's you almost struggle to remember that very, very recently, Boeing was a byword in quality and safety. And they've completely frittered that away. And so what's the difference between Airbus's relatively rapid recovery and Boeing's, just rolling in the mud, basically, the quagmire of bad publicity that it seems to be stuck in? Airbus has continued to make good, safe planes. That's it. I mean, it's like if you're a manufacturer and you produce a substandard product, you're going to ultimately pay the price. And it's much harder to build trust than to squander trust.
But do you think the pandemic had a specific role to play there? Because if we look at what happened after 2018 and 19, we didn't see such a dip in share price compared to what happened after the pandemic. Are there any other factors at play there?
I think there's a lot of factors at play. Certainly when the pandemic struck and the airline orders dried up, costs were saved by furloughing people, by firing people, by trimming payrolls, by losing talent. And it takes decades to build the kind of specific expertise that is required to build these almost unimaginably complex machines. And the relative advantage that a company like Boeing has over all of its rivals, and why it has with Airbus maintained essentially a duopoly that is unassailable. It's very hard to break into this business. Why? Because how do you accumulate the decades of experience in your workforce to make a machine that has millions of parts? Safely is the other part of it. And so if you're basically just letting your massive competitive advantage walk out the door, that's an incredibly short-sighted thing to do.
I want to listen in now to what Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun said last month following that incident with the door panel on the Alaska Airlines flight.
We believe in our airplanes. We field safe airplanes. Our people do. We have confidence in the safety of our airplanes. And that's what all of this is about.
Jeff, Dave Calhoun took over at Boeing in 2020. He inherited the crisis that came after those two 737 MAX crashes. And then he had to deal with the pandemic. In fairness, a pretty unenviable task. How has he approached the task of crisis manager?
Delusionally. I mean, Calhoun was already on the board. I mean, it's not like he just came in, innocently into this difficult situation. He had a hand in creating this situation. And these noises about, Boeing always puts safety first, they say that after every single disaster. The noise, they just reorder the words slightly. It's the same noises again and again and again. Yeah, I mean, it's delusional. Because what did he say? He said, we believe in the safety. You don't need belief, okay? You need facts. You need get your mathematicians on it. Tell us what our error rate is. Tell us where the problems are in our system. You have a systemic problem. And frankly, the main component of that systemic problem is the leadership, AKA Dave Calhoun.
You've used the term extinction level event earlier. If we look at where Boeing is today, it's been barred from expanding production of its 737 MAX until quality control issues are addressed. Calhoun is now saying it's time to go slow, to go fast. How do you rate the company's chances of emerging from this crisis with its reputation in any way repaired?
It's like you're eating at a restaurant and a rat runs along the floor, okay? And you think, okay, there's a rat, there's probably 100 rats. And the waiter comes out and says, look, we value our health and our cleanliness is our primary, value here in this restaurant. And you're like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And I'm not going to come back to eat at this restaurant until there's different management, right? How do you regain trust if you're the same person? How does someone who has manifestly demonstrated that they're not worthy of trust regain trust without making any attempt to do anything differently? What are they doing differently? I fail to see any difference.
We've covered dinosaurs and we've covered rats. Jeff Wise, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.